You're listening to Healing Voices Project, where we share stories and the latest information from people who fight addiction every day. I'm Mike Torville, your host and author of Voices from the Fallen. Thank you for listening, for following, and most of all, for sharing with people you care about. Make your voice count too. Hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining us at Healing Voices Project. I am happy and honored to bring on our guest today. His name is KUTE BLACKSON. And if you haven't heard of KUTE BLACKSON before, well, after today, I have a feeling you're going to hear his name a lot more in the future. KUTE is an inspirational speaker, transformational teacher, and author of You Are the One and the Magic of Surrender. And I've read both those books, very enlightening. I loved them both, and we'll talk a lot about those books very soon. KUTE speaks at countless events all over the world and is a member of the Transformational Leadership Council and is widely considered a next generation leader in personal development. And among many of the other ventures that KUTE has is his own podcast called Soul Talk. And I've been listening and enjoying the program very much. So KUTE, thank you so much for joining us here at Healing Voices Project.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Now, I see on your website that your mission, and it's very simple, to awaken and inspire people across the planet to access inner freedom, live authentically, and fulfill their true life's purpose. That's a pretty hefty mission to take on.
What else is there to do, my friend?
Right, exactly. Now, we talk a lot about many aspects of healing from addiction, mental illness, and trauma. We discuss all types of treatments, medical, physical, and spiritual. And I think the one that seems hardest to define or understand or practice is the spiritual side of recovery. Yet it comes up so often. I found it can mean different things to different people. And I think we'll explore a lot of that today with you. Now, I think you mentioned that in your book, and you talk about the spiritual side of things and the magic of surrender. And I think we can certainly dive into that a little bit. And maybe before we do that, because if there are listeners who aren't sure of what you're all about, and could you talk a little bit about your background, what brought you to the States, what brought you from Ghana, and what's transpired to help you bring where you are today?
Yeah, I was born in Ghana, West Africa. My father's from Ghana. My mother's Japanese. I grew up in London. I've lived in the US now for probably most of my life, since I was 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm a citizen of the world, from everywhere and nowhere. For me, as a young boy, I was a very empathetic kid. So I felt people very deeply. And I felt a deep desire to alleviate suffering in some way. I didn't know what that would look like. I just felt an impulse to do that. And
but this comes from your upbringing and your father, who was a healer, right?
Yeah. My first memories as a young boy was being lost in the crowd in Ghana, West Africa. And I see a crippled woman crawling on the floor. She picks up the sand that this man walks on, wipes it on her face, and stands up. Week after week, I grew up seeing blind people see, deaf people hear, people stand up out of wheelchairs. I mean, the type of stuff that sometimes if you see on TV, you wonder if it's real. But I grew up seeing it in front of me. And the man whose sand she picked up was my father. And he was considered the miracle man of Africa. He was a spiritual teacher to presidents and heads of states and, many influential people. He had 300 churches in Ghana, West Africa, hundreds of thousands of followers, had a huge church in London, 5,000 people every Sunday. Wow. So I grew up in this environment where, regularly I would see people show up in wheelchairs, and he would look at them and say, "Why are you in this wheelchair? Stand up." Or somebody would show up with crutches, and he would say, "Throw your crutches away and start walking." And so he was a real man of faith, a man of belief. I started speaking in my father's churches when I was age 8, and I was ordained at 14. I was given the mandate to take over my father's organization at a very young age with a lot of responsibility. But deep down, I knew, if I was honest, that this wasn't my path, this wasn't my destiny. But at 14, as a kid, I was too afraid
Of course,
to
yeah.
speak my truth. My fear was if I really dared to speak my truth and say what I really wanted to say, that I would be outcast, that I'd be alone, that I would lose my father's love, and I'd be by myself. And I think many of us, we allow fear to hijack us and fear to stop us from truly, truly being who we really are.
Yeah.
And I went along with it for 4 years. And so from 14 to 18, I was a minister and, was a part of my father's organization and spoke on some Sundays and traveled with him some of the time. But I went through a tremendous inner turmoil, a tremendous internal conflict, knowing that I felt called to go in a different direction. I felt my soul calling me to come to the US. I felt my soul calling me to go into the field of personal growth because as a kid, I would sneak into my father's office. On his bookshelf, there were thousands of spiritual books, self-help books from the Eastern mystics, everyone from Krishnamurti and Osho and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, to the Western mystics of people like Blavatsky, to Wayne Dyer, to Louise Hay, to Deepak Chopra. And so I began reading and devouring a lot of these books. And I wanted to come to the US because a lot of the authors that the modern day teachers who happen to be writing self-help books lived in California, lived in Los Angeles, lived in San Diego. And so I felt my soul calling me to come here. And sometimes I think what your soul guides you to do doesn't always make sense to your mind. What your soul guides you to do isn't always convenient. But I really believe that when you follow your soul, when you follow your true inner guidance, you will always be guided in the right direction, in the right way, with the right people at the right time, even though the route that you take may not be the one that you most expect. And so when I was 18, I knew what I had to do, which was leave everything behind. And I renounced everything. I decided to have a courageous conversation with my father. I
That
looked
must have
into
been
my
tough. Yeah.
It was scary. I was honestly terrified before the conversation, during the conversation, after the conversation, still wondering if I'd made the wrong decision. I looked into my future and I saw that I could follow the expected path. I could do what everybody expected of me and be successful. But if I didn't have myself, if I didn't have my soul, if I didn't have my truth, I was just betraying myself. And that pain of self-betrayal was so strong that I knew I had to leave. And I realized if I began to lie to myself now at that young age, I would have to lie to myself the rest of my life. And that became incredibly painful. And so at 18, I had the conversation, and my father and I, we didn't speak for about 2 years.
Oh,
So
boy.
that was tremendously challenging, very, very, very difficult.
How about your mom? I mean, your mom was.
My mother supported me
Yeah.
unconditionally, as mothers tend to do. At least I had a mother who was unconditionally loving and supportive. And she said, if this is what you feel, I support you no matter what. And so that gave me a bit of courage to follow my truth. And I left everything. And in that moment, long story short, I ended up winning a green card in the green card lottery.
Oh, yeah.
And that enabled me to come to the US and 2 suitcases, $800 in my pocket, and followed my dream. And landed in America, landed in Los Angeles, and went and found many of the teachers, the mentors, the authors that I read about, studied with some of them. A few years later, I ended up.
Now, let me, not to interrupt you, but when you came here with $800 and didn't know anybody and said, okay, I'm here on my own, how did you get the attention of people to say, okay, I'll spend time listening and meeting with you? Because
I took some of the money and I went to some seminars. There was a thing called Learning NX in Los Angeles, and I paid $25 for a seminar, $50. I basically used all of my money going to seminars. And went to people like Deepak Chopra, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, on and on, Marianne Williamson. And I just went there and started networking and meeting people. Some folks, I literally just showed up. I looked at the back of their books, saw where their addresses were, and just started to show up at their addresses. A few people I didn't know it was their homes, and I ended up knocking on the door of their houses, and they were like, who the hell are you?
Yeah, right.
And I just felt like I was so naive. I just felt like I knew these people. They were my heroes as a kid. Remember, knocked on Jack Canfield's office door in Culver City, and They said he wasn't there, and I refused to leave until he came out. And eventually he came out, and we sat down, had a conversation for about 45 minutes. That was very pivotal at 18 years old. And so I just went and met these people. You know,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
was naive enough, innocent enough, courageous enough, stupid enough, all of it combined to
Mm-hmm.
just, I was possessed with a vision.
Yeah.
And, and, it was a very amazing experience. But they reached the point where I felt a deeper calling than I felt I was guided to travel. I wanted to know truth for myself. I wanted to know. I got to the point where I was tired of just reading the books and reading someone else's information. I wanted to know in my own being what was true, what my
Mm-hmm.
purpose was, what the essence of who am I really? And so I decided to. I was guided to walk the Camino in northern Spain,
Oh,
which is
yeah. Yeah.
900 kilometers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I went to Thailand, studied with a few monks, went to Israel, ended up in India. And it
Mm-hmm.
was my time in India for about 3 to 4 months that really shook my world and transformed me from the inside out. And
How
that's when
did
I got.
what happened that shook your world in India?
It wasn't one thing.
Uh-huh.
I went to India expecting it to be all love and light and roses. And India, I couldn't wait to leave. The moment I landed, I couldn't wait to leave. It was
Oh, yeah.
no offense to India because I love India. I've been there 36 times. It seemed dirty and filthy and poor people everywhere and dust and smoke and chaos and nothing was organized. And I hated it the first time I arrived. And probably a few days into it, somehow India grabbed a hold of me. And somehow India knows how to reach into your psyche and find those places that you are holding on to control. It knows how to reach into your egoic identification and shake it to the core. And somehow India shook out all of those places inside of me, found those places inside of me, triggered those places inside of me, and made me, forced me to surrender myself because nothing was in my control. Nothing seemed to be the way, nothing seemed to go the way I wanted it to go. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was very transformative. I saw things in India. I had certain spiritual experiences in India. I met teachers and gurus and enlightened masters and mystics, but I had certain experiences in India, some of which were unexpected. For instance, sitting by the Ganges and just being blown open to
Mm-hmm.
the sort of energetic nature of how everything is completely and totally interconnected and one. And that just dissolved something inside of me. And so many of these experiences opened me, and I was guided. In a nutshell, I almost died a few times on that journey as well, and facing my death and surrendering my life because I actually thought I was dying while I was climbing up the Himalayas.
Mm.
Only later to find out it was altitude sickness, but I literally thought I was dying and hallucinating, and I said goodbye to life and everyone, and which
Remember
was
reading about
really,
that in the book too. Yes.
it was really
Yeah.
dramatic and
Yeah.
intense in the moment, but it
Mhm.
was transformative.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't come down the mountain the same. And so when I came down the mountain, I felt a deep calling to go back to America and start helping people. And honestly, I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't know how. All I knew was I felt free and I felt fulfilled and happy. And I had no
Mm-hmm.
reason to be happy because I had no money, I had no fame, I had nothing.
But yet
And
you were energized.
I felt a sense of calm and peace
Yeah.
like I never felt.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted people to feel that. It was a sense of freedom that wasn't dependent on anything else. That wasn't dependent on external objects or external results. And so I just sincerely wanted people to feel that. And sure enough, a few people came up to me and said, "Hey, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
You seem kind of happy." And we would begin talking, and eventually I got my first client coaching, and one person led to the next person, led to the next person. My way of working with people just began to evolve, and people started coming from around the world to work with me. As my work evolved, as my methodology evolved, I started to what I call uncoach people from patterns of conditioning that we develop over time. And it grew into small groups and larger groups and larger groups, and it just expanded to my first book and my second book. And so here we are.
And something you said, and I remember hearing about this too. If you're a coach, yet you said you uncoach people. Can you tell me what
Yes.
you mean by that?
Yeah, for me, what I began to realize is that at the depth of our being, we're all already whole and complete. We're all perfect. If you look at a child is free.
Yeah.
If you look at a child is whole, perfect, and complete. We look into a child's eyes, and I think we all remember what we were. A child will jump on a table naked and doesn't care and no self-consciousness. It
You're
will
not doing that
sing.
now, though, are you? Right?
It will
No.
sing at the top of its lungs, right? It
Right.
doesn't care if
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like Bruno Mars or Barbra Streisand. It's just, we're just so free. And so what happens is we incarnate into this human experience and we get conditioned. We meet our parents and they're just doing the best that they knew how to do based on their childhood and their upbringing and well-intentioned, but they're conditioned by their grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents. And so we're born into a preset, pre-framed pattern of beliefs and conditioning. And so maybe dad was crazy. Maybe mom was an alcoholic. Maybe they were fighting all the time. Divorce, pain, abuse, trauma. Maybe they were just lovely people, but they didn't have the emotional intelligence to know how to meet our emotional needs. And so a couple of things happen. The first thing is we learn all sorts of strategies based on our environment and the pain and what's going on around us to shut down, disconnect, and not feel what's going on, to not feel how painful it is, how helpless we felt in not having those needs met or the feeling of abandonment. So we shut down, disconnect. Before you know it, we suppress layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of unfelt feeling that begin to cover up our true light. We start erecting all sorts of defense mechanisms to navigate our emotions and feelings, and that becomes a form of control and contraction. We learn a way of being to go into the world, and we start contorting ourselves into a certain shape to become who we think we need to be in order to get love and validation and approval. We develop a role, a mask, a persona. We contort ourselves into the shape, and we actually think that the version of ourselves that we have contorted ourselves into, which is a form of conditioning, is who we really are. But it's not who we really are. It's just what we've been conditioned to be. And now we hold so tightly to that method of that way we've been conditioned that we're not free. And I think the degree to which we're conditioned is the degree to which we're not free. The degree to which we're conditioned is the degree to which we're not free to express our voice, to give our gift, to love fully. And we wonder why we feel so much potential inside of us that is not able to get out because we're locked in a prison of conditioning. Most of the time, we're not even aware of that conditioning. And so for me, we're not conscious. It's a survival mechanism with good intention to protect us and prevent us from getting hurt. And we learn that way of being unconsciously at a young age that helps us when we're 5 and helps us when we're 10 and works for us when we're 15. But by the time we reach maybe 25 and 35 and 45 and 55, it starts getting in the way. It starts inhibiting our freedom. And so for me, my work became more about helping people become firstly conscious and aware of their conditioning, because we're not aware. We think that that's who we are. And so it's to become conscious and aware. So awareness is the first step, to become aware that we're conditioned, to become aware in all of the ways that we're conditioned, and to provide a space for people to kind of unravel that conditioning so that they can get in touch with the true nature of what they are that's always there.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for that explanation. That's very helpful. And when you talk about your books, You Are the One and The Magic of Surrender, can you talk a little bit about, and I enjoyed You Are the One because you talk about taking responsibility and you're not relying on a list of people. It's you. And talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into The Magic of Surrender.
Yeah, You Are the One is a simple book. It's my first book. It's all about realizing that nobody's coming. Yeah. And so many of us, we're waiting for someone to do it for us. We're waiting for our parents to do what they never did. We're waiting for the government to fix things. We're waiting for some superhero to do it. We're waiting for our spouse. We're waiting for someone else to apologize. We're waiting for somebody else to fix our lives. And the truth is, I think one of the first steps to transformation is that willingness to take full responsibility for where we're at. Yes, certain things happened that shouldn't have happened. Yes, certain things were unfortunate. Yes, we've all been through pain, hurt, trauma, difficulties, things that we should not have gone through. but we can't change what's happened, and what's happened has happened. But what we all have the power to do is choose in this moment what we're going to do, the meaning we're going to make, what we're going to do, and the actions we're going to take. And so You Are the One is all about helping people remember that we have the power inside of us, and that nobody owes us anything. And that led to the magic of surrender, which I'm very excited about.
Me too. I enjoyed that very much. And so the magic of surrender too. And one of the first things I thought about when I was starting to read, and you addressed this very early on, is when somebody says you think about surrendering, does that mean giving up? Just letting things flow the way they're supposed to without any real intent, or just giving in? Because I think people might misunderstand that, but it's really not about that at all, as Dewey explained it.
Yeah, I think in our culture today, we have a kind of misconception of what surrender is. We have this notion that surrender is giving up. Surrender is waving the white flag. Surrender is not taking action. Surrender is being a victim. Surrender means being left behind, being taken advantage of. Surrender means you won't manifest your goals, dreams, and desires. Surrender means you're going to get less in life. And I'm actually thinking, when you truly understand the real essence of surrender, what if you didn't get less in life, but what if you actually got more? More in true surrender, what if you got more than you could have even planned and imagined and visualized and intended with your limited human consciousness and awareness? And so I believe that surrender is, in fact, the most powerful thing that we can do as human beings. I believe that surrender is the nature of life. Surrender is the key to freedom. Surrender is the password to freedom. If you look at all of the truly great ones, Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Bob Marley, Muhammad Ali, Mandela, Martin Luther King, Bruce Lee, at some point, they all surrendered themselves, to life, to their soul, to the bigger destiny that was seeking to express through them. And in that surrender, they transcended their human limitations. And in that surrender, they tapped into another dimension of potential. And that's when I think life was able to move through them. Life was able to manifest through them. Life was able to express through them. Life was able to use them in ways that they could not have planned and imagined based on their own human limited experience. And so part of surrender is to let go of control, or I should say, the illusion that we're in control.
The desire to control.
Yeah, the control is a master addiction. Part of surrender is when we stop trying to force and manipulate life to fit our limited idea of how we think it should be and how we think it should look. Surrender is when we give up the idea of who we think we should be and how we think we should be, so that we can take the limitations off of life. Because sometimes with our ideas, with our goals, with our identity, we don't realize that we are in fact limiting life in certain ways. And so surrender is to take the limits off of life so that we can be truly available and open to allowing life to show us, allowing the highest impulse of what life is seeking to express, to unfold in our lives. And so it doesn't mean doing nothing. What surrender really, the essence is, see, the old paradigm way of living and creating was all, I call it the ego-based model for living life, which is about, what do you want? Know what you want and go make it happen, create it, force it, will it into being. And I'm not saying that that cannot work. Yeah, it has a place. It can work, but it's limited to a degree, because what we create from the level of the mind and the level of the ego, the mind is conditioned by past experience. That the mind and the ego is not able to see the totality of existence and what is seeking to happen. So for me, in surrender, there's a different question. And that question becomes asking oneself, what is life seeking to express? What is the deepest impulse of what life is seeking to express through me? What is the deepest impulse that my soul is seeking to express? What does God, the universe, the divine want to manifest through me? And then it's about being still and listening and attuning oneself to that most authentic expression and impulse and intention. Then we can align our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, our personalities, our resources with that. And that's when we go into action. giving 100%. And as we give 100% by giving total action with what's in alignment, which is in flow, letting go of the attachment to the outcome. And sometimes we get so attached to that outcome, that's when we limit life.
I think the word that kept coming through me was the word resistance, and the opposite of resistance, and to stop resisting.
Yeah.
And that's what just kept coming through me, because so often we'll resist things instead of just allowing. And sometimes you end up fighting that surrender by resisting so much. Do you find that true?
Yes. Look, resistance is okay and resistance is natural. I would invite people to understand that you don't need to resist the resistance, because sometimes resisting the resistance, all it does is create more resistance. Well, like in an effort to surrender, it's like stop resisting, which creates more resistance and less surrender. Sometimes part of surrender is the willingness to embrace resistance as a part of the bigger unfolding, as a part of the bigger process, and see how you can meet your resistance with compassion and with love and with acceptance. Because here's the thing, what resists is the ego. And the ego is what we mistakenly believe ourselves to be. Ego is the sense of identification based on name, body, form, age, history, past, memories, experiences from the past that we hold so tightly onto, that holding on position, that holding on identification is ego. And the ego's job is to reinforce its existence. And the ego's job, which was created from conditioning in response to pain and hurt and trauma and disconnecting from feelings so that we can be safe, the ego's job is to make sure that we don't get hurt again and we don't feel some of those feelings of helplessness, of pain, of rejection that we felt. And so the ego, which has learned to develop a self-defense mechanism, it means well. So it's afraid that if I let go and surrender, I'm going to get hurt again. So got to resist, got to control, got to overanalyze. If I control and I overanalyze and control everything, then I won't get hurt again. So the intention of ego is a beautiful one. It's just limited. And so when we realize that ego is not what we are, ego is not a thing, it's a process. We mistakenly believe that ego is what we are. And the job of the ego is to reinforce its existence. So when you say let go and surrender, for the ego, not only is it afraid of getting hurt, but when you say surrender and let go, it's afraid that, well, I won't exist. So surrender feels like a terrifying death for the ego. But when we understand that we are not the ego, that what we are is so much more, an infinite energy, a consciousness, then we start understanding that in letting go and in surrendering, what we let go is not us. What we let go is really the pattern of conditioning that we've learned to kind of contort into in order to function, survive, get love, validation, approval. We are not that pattern. And so for the ego, resistance is natural in the face of surrender. So if we can understand what we are and what we're not, then we can learn how to begin meeting ego, meeting what we thought of as ourselves, meeting that resistance with loving and non-resistance and compassion, and holding ourselves with a bit of tenderness and awareness and spaciousness. Then ego, the aspect that is resisting, can begin to relax, can begin to open, can begin to melt.
Well, and I know you talk a lot about that in the book. And again, the name of the book is The Magic of Surrender. And by the way, we didn't mention your website, and we should have mentioned that earlier. But what is your website again, Kute?
My website is my name, KUTE, KUTEBlackson.com. That's the website.
All right. Well, we'll make sure to mention that. I wanted to mention earlier, and I just forgot to. And you know, we talk, as we talked earlier, we talk a lot on this podcast about addiction and drug, alcohol addiction, substance abuse, how it affects people and their families. And I know when we're talking about the ego and anxiety and depression, it's not easy for people to get through this, whether it's affecting them themselves or their family members. And how would your message help those going through this kind of struggle?
And the struggle of addiction.
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I would say it's never an easy thing going through addiction. It's never an easy thing going through something like that. And I have so much, I don't know, compassion and empathy, because it's easy to just say, oh, just get over it, just be done with it, just give it up. Yet, even if we know that we should, sometimes there's still a internal resistance or urge to do that thing. And so I think we have to treat the conversation with first a tremendous empathy and compassion, because I think the only way healing can happen is through loving and compassion. Healing is applying love to those parts of us that are hurting. And so to me, I think when we have addiction, many times addiction is an attempt to avoid a feeling,
yes,
or get another feeling.
Escape.
And so escape,
yeah.
to
yes.
escape a feeling,
yeah,
to feel something else and not deal with the feeling that we're feeling because it was too painful. So maybe it was too painful feeling abandoned. It was too painful feeling rejected. It was too painful in this traumatic situation. So if I escape, if I do this drug, then I don't have to feel this and I can feel something else, right? And so I think if we can understand that underlying even that behavior of addiction, that there is a positive intention, then we can learn to start the process of even dealing with the addiction with the space and a relationship of loving and compassion. This way, we're not beating ourselves up to try and get over our addiction, but we're meeting ourselves with loving, compassion, awareness, understanding, knowing that what we're reaching for, that we think is going to get us something, even though it's a dead-end path, doesn't really work, the intention is good. The intention is positive. And so I think at the root of addiction, many times, there are traumatic feelings and emotions that we actually haven't fully allowed ourselves to deal with. Pain, hurt, grief, right? Grief is often one, loneliness. And so I think in our culture today, we don't have a context we're not taught how to feel our feelings in a healthy way. We're taught from a very young age, oh, you feel pain, you feel terror, you feel hurt. Yeah, just pop this pill.
Right.
You feel hurt, just go shopping, buy this handbag, right. eat this hamburger, everything will be great. And so we're kind of like brainwashed from childhood to not feel our feelings, and it's the not feeling our feelings in a healthy, conscious way that keeps those feelings present, that then perpetuates the reaching for the addiction as a way and a coping mechanism to deal with that feeling.
Yes,
and
we are
so,
very programmed to expect instant gratification too.
Yes. All feelings remain present really till fully felt. And so in our culture, I think many times we don't want to feel our feelings because we're afraid it will be too much. It will be too painful, that we won't survive, that it will overwhelm us, that it will never end. And sometimes we also don't feel our feelings that we need to feel as a kind of unconscious way to hold on to something or someone. For instance, my mother dies. I don't really want to acknowledge it. The pain is there, so I deny it. That pain doesn't go anywhere. I carry it with me. And as a way to now cope with that grief, I start drinking to numb it. I start drinking and I drink more and more and more and more just to numb it. And so sometimes not feeling the grief, not feeling the pain becomes a strange way of holding on to my mother, of holding on to that relationship. Because if I don't acknowledge the pain, then maybe I don't have to acknowledge that she's really there, and I can always stay connected to her. Or if I don't acknowledge that this relationship is over and I'm incredibly heartbroken and hurt and I don't feel this pain, then I don't have to deal with the fact that it's done, it's over, and I need to let go. And so sometimes not feeling becomes a way to hold on to something that it's time to let go of. And so all feelings remain present till fully felt. Feelings that we don't feel fully will often express themselves in unhealthy ways, some form of sabotage, some form of physical ailment, illness, emotional pain, emotional depression, addiction. And so I think what we have to realize is that all feelings are transitory and temporary, and we have to start to be willing, in a safe context, with some guidance, with some support, with a therapist, with a guide, with a coach, to begin to create the space to navigate those feelings layer by layer by layer that we've learned to bury, that the addiction is often trying to cover up. And so one last thing I'll say is this. Sometimes people feel or tell me, but I think I'm feeling my feelings and it never seems to end. But sometimes we mistakenly think that we're feeling our feelings, but we don't realize that we're thinking about our feelings, not necessarily feeling our feelings. We're analyzing and judging and trying to figure out those feelings or get rid of those feelings without truly feeling them. And so what I invite people to do as a way to truly feel your feelings, which is different than wallowing in your feelings. To truly feel your feelings is, I tell people, take the label off of the feeling, pain, hurt, grief, and just allow yourself to experience the feeling as pure energy and sensation in your body. If you can just be with the feeling as a sensation in your body, wow, it's a warmth in my chest, and actually just be with it, experience it fully, and notice what happens. You will often begin to find that you actually are fully just being with the feeling without trying to get rid of it. And in that fully experiencing it, a layer of that feeling starts to dissolve. And I think each time we're able to just feel the feeling and be with the feeling, and another layer dissolves, another layer dissolves, another layer dissolves. There's space, there's opening, there's spaciousness. And I think that's also when healing can happen. And in that spaciousness, we start letting things go. We start letting pain go. The less we need to reach for an addiction to cover up that feeling, because that feeling is now truly dissolving.
Right. And, and so many people that I've spoken with and through their recovery, the moment, or at least the time when they finally say is when they've surrendered to it, to say, now I'm going to allow this kind of help to happen. And we talked earlier about the spiritual side of healing. And it's never just one thing. It might be medically assisted counseling, different ways, but spirituality, and it's all different for different people, is something that you were just discussing, and it doesn't just happen overnight. It requires, for lack of a better word, practice. Something you really have to not just think about, but just feel, as you've said. And it just doesn't happen overnight. And I guess it's just a matter of people to really put that surrendering to use, the way you've just described it with the labels. It's easier said than done. I know that.
I think. Well, I would just say, even we'll talk about surrender and spirituality, because I think when we talk about surrender, people often say, "Oh, it's so hard. It's so difficult." And on one level, it is. Okay, on one level, it seems to be. For the ego, it's terrifying. But I'm actually going to propose that surrender is really, in essence, the easiest thing. Surrender is natural for us as human beings, because it's not as hard as it's hard because we've just been conditioned to hold on. So for those listening on audio, I'm making a fist and I'm holding a pen. I'm holding this pen so tightly. Most of us, we become like this fist throughout life, and we hold on to ourselves, to that way of being, and we hold on and we hold on. And at first it's painful, But eventually this holding on starts to feel kind of normal.
Mm-hmm.
But if I say, okay, surrender, well, surrender is really easy. I mean, just letting go is not hard. It's just that we've been conditioned to hold on. So
Yes.
surrender is really the easy. I just want people to know it's harder to actually resist and hold on. That takes more work to fight. To hold on is actually harder than to let go. We've just become so conditioned. And so it's our conditioning. And so if we can just start embracing, oh, surrender is natural, surrender is easy, surrender is just the nature of things.
It's the build up to it that's difficult.
It's what we think will happen on the other side. It's the consequences. It's the stories that we make up will happen on the other side. And so I just want people to just feel and reframe. Oh, surrender is actually natural. It's natural. Like I was talking to a midwife the other day, and on her wall was the sign that said, giving birth is the most natural thing. Where a lot of people go into giving birth, like, oh, it's this big thing. It's a miracle, miraculous, amazing thing. But the truth is, people have been doing it for millions of years. And giving birth for a woman is really the most natural thing for her body if we can just reframe it. And when we reframe it that way, we start moving out of fear. In terms of spiritual practice, I really feel as though all of life is a spiritual process. All of life is a process of surrender. Life itself is the ultimate process of surrender. We are all, whether you are spiritual or not, whether you are Pablo Escobar, Mother Teresa, it doesn't matter. We are all in the process of surrender. And I think it really is more about how do we participate in the process of surrender. You can surrender now. You can surrender tomorrow. You can surrender at the end of your life. We will all have to surrender. For those that believe in the next life, then you're going to surrender the next lifetime or next 17 lifetimes. But we will all have to surrender. There's no way out, so to speak. And so life is a process of surrender. We're born, we start to age. Hair falls out, the body changes, the hands change, the bodies change, the face changes. This is surrender. We're being surrendered every moment, even as we age. And so how do we participate in that? And so life is the practice of surrender. The only thing we're really here to do as human beings is to surrender to our true self, surrender to what we truly are. And so I think once we start taking life as a process of surrender, then there's no like on-off switch. There's not like, oh, I'll surrender now for 5 minutes, but then I'll live my life.
Yeah.
All of life is a spiritual practice. It's not like, oh, spiritual practice when I'm on my meditation cushion, spiritual practice when I'm doing yoga. It's like, no, spiritual practice when you're making love to your wife, to your husband, changing the diapers of your child, taking out the trash, walking with a friend, being in the grocery store, looking someone in the eyes, like every moment is an opportunity to feel and acknowledge the sacredness.
And being present. And I'll quote something you said in the book that it was a simple line, very simple, but said, spirituality is what you are and the awareness that you bring into what you do.
There you go. And that sounds good to me.
Sounds good when I say it, but it's your word. But I think it's a simple thing that we might even overcomplicate in our minds because, again, we've been programmed to do that. And it's just something that I think we, as you said earlier, we're not aware of all these things that occur to us and how we might resist it and open ourselves up. And I would highly recommend to all the listeners, KUTE's book, both books. We talked a lot about the magic of surrender, and I highly recommend it. And KUTE's website is KUTE, KUTE, KUTEBLACKSON.com. That's an easy one to remember. So what's new on your venture, KUTE?
Yeah, just continue to create. We're creating a lot of online programs in this next year.
Yeah.
I'm also beginning to develop a new book idea, maybe a children's book idea, a lot of different ventures. This is 2023, depending on people listening to this conversation. I'll be doing my final events in Bali. For the last 10 years, I did an event, a 12-day transformational event in Bali called Boundless Bliss. And so for those that might be inspired by today's conversation to find out more, It's a 12-day experiential seminar training without walls in Bali. It's life-changing. I've done 20 of these in the last 10 years. People can find out more at www.boundlessblissbali.com and find out the info there. So I'll be doing that this year. It's my final. The next one is July, and it's my final 2 events.
Oh, wow. Wow. And then I'm sure you'll be doing other things like that, but just not that same event. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, honestly, I it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
It's been enlightening, and I appreciate it.
All Thanks for having me.
Sure. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we're glad to have you here. And again, thanks, KUTE, and visit KUTE Blackson's website, KUTEBlackson.com, and his book, The Magic of Surrender. Thanks again, everybody, and thank you, KUTE, for joining us. Very much appreciate it.